Well, thank you all for coming. Grafton Tyler Brown, sort of a conundrum, which is why I have the black and white, which is both his lithography and his racial background. Because he was born African American, he passed very quickly as white in San Francisco in 1860 or 61, but yet those who wanted to see Brown as African American did. The United States census takers in 1860 and 1870 certainly had no problems. He was entered as mulatto. Likewise, the R.G. Dunn credit reporter. But yet he did his business as a lithographer, which was quite fascinating to me, and he became quite an accomplished person because art became his whole life. Unfortunately, I have not been able to find any family papers, any letters or anything like that. Those would have gone back to his family in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Some of the later materials, scrapbooks from his art career, did survive, but nothing really personal. So a lot of this is conjecture. I trust all of you recognize Ghirardelli Square there. That's the pioneer woolen mill of which Ghirardelli took the old mill building for his chocolate factory, and that building is still there. That came from a set of 9 sample sheets, which I did a little pamphlet up there, which you can look through. There's Grafton Tyler Brown at his easel in Victoria, British Columbia in 1882. He was their first landscape artist. I was talking at the Bayview Public Library, and the 2 ladies there said, "Of course he's African American. You know, why would you think otherwise?" Well, in 1860s California, people either did or they didn't care. Because Brown, as I said, was foremost an artist, and this is what he was going to do all of his life. He was also a great publicist, pushing himself forward to try new things, to become known, and advance himself. On the right there is a little sticker about the size of a postage stamp, which was on an envelope on the left corner. But just something that, you know, hey, I'm here. And for those of you who collect revenue stamps, the design is based on that of the California revenue stamps, which were ugly. Brown did a much better job. This I use as an analogy of his past. His parents were free black persons from Maryland who moved to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, or supposedly from Maryland. Brown never knew the birthplace of his father, but his brother Cassius did. Well, it had been down as Maryland. Cassius revealed much later it was South Carolina, the state that began the Civil War, or the War of the Southern Rebellion, over slavery. So you can see Thomas Brown, Dad, trying to keep his background secret. I picked the Archie Lee book as the runaway slave. This was a California slave case in 1858, where the Supreme Court finally decided that California was a free state. Even though the Constitution said so, the Democrats, Southern Democrats, held there was no enacting legislation. The court says, yes, it is, but then the court in its wisdom says, we're going to give the slave back to his master. Of course, the black community had definite ideas like that, and they spreaded Archie Lee away, and he ended up in Victoria, British Columbia. And the cover, of course, is Millette Dean. Anyway, Brown, at 17, left Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Jury came by steamer, because that was steerage, because that was the fastest, most economical way. It's the Golden Gate if you're interested. And he arrived in Sacramento, working as a steward in the St. George Hotel. As it was, the black population was about 1% of the California population, perhaps 5,000 people in the entire state, largest, of course, in San Francisco. So it wasn't viable, nor did it have need for lithographers, which, if you were an artist, was about the only thing you could do, because even the California oil painting, landscape painting market hadn't taken off then. So you did drawings and reproduced them by lithography. So what Brown did was pick whatever opportunities in life he could and make the most of them. So here's my symbol of his passing. Up at the top left, the British steamship Great Eastern. What is it? I think it's 5 funneled, 6 masts, largest ship in the world. Brown did a drawing of this ship, and it was posted in the hotel. And the Sacramento Union, which is the paper of record for California at that time, noticed good painting, and it praised Brown as an untrained youth who had done this great thing. He has public notice. 1860, he did the same thing at the State Agricultural Fair. He did a railroad engine, and again, he got praise. Now, I'm going back a bit. In the 1860s, 50s, I mean, Charles Kuchel and Emil Dressel did 50 or so large bird's-eye views of San Francisco cities and towns. Well, wine proved to be their downfall. Emil Dressel went into cultivating up in Sonoma County, and the winery is still there. Charles Kuchel tried to become a wine distributor, and he was also president of the Anaheim colony in Los Angeles, and all of this bankrupted him. So he had to seek refuge, and he decided to restart his lithography business. Well, Emil Dressel had been the hustler, which is up there on the top right. This was the guy who went around to the people in the town and says, "We're doing this view. Would you like to subscribe for the view?" And if they said yes, and it's, well, we're going to have a town view. Would you like to have the name of your store in the town view? That'll be a little more. Then, how about a vignette of your business around the border? This is, of course, more. So this is what Brown did in the spring of 1861 in Virginia City, Nevada. The Comstock lode was just starting. Brown had gone from San Francisco, hooked up with Kuchel, and Kuchel sent him out. So Brown was both the sketch artist and the hustler. And this was 61, 41. Okay, he was 20 years old. So he'd essentially, as far as passing goes, everyone accepted him because in June of 1861, that lithograph came out. And thank you, Bancroft Library, Honeymoon Collection. Brown, among other things, probably had been voting since 1862. When he became of age. There was not a registry law in California until 1866, and Grafton Brown registered in 1867 for that election. This, of course, was before the 15th Amendment, which gave black men suffrage. Well, who was he voting for? Well, his partial cover for his race, also because they were hungry, he voted for the Democrats. Now, I haven't been able to find a more bunch of racist Democrats at this time, if I tried, because we start with Benjamin Franklin Washington, who's the chief of the land the Tideland Commission, because Brown is going to be doing maps. Ben Washington was descended from George Washington's elder brother. In 1861, he was the collector of the port of San Francisco, which was a chief federal patronage position. And you might guess his views. He retired saying, well, the state of California should recognize the independence of the southern states. Not exactly a good Union position, so he holed up during the war. After the war, the Democratic newspaper needed a new editor and a new name. So the Democratic press became a paper you may have heard of. It was called the Examiner. Ben Washington was its editor. And if you want to know what he felt about black men and women, you just have to read him through the columns of the Examiner. This was Grafton's boss. So what Brown did was he became the contractor for the Tideland maps, which I'll show you one later, which were huge things for the state to sell swamplands, overflowed lands, tidal lands. So we have Brown positioning himself with the Democratic Party and getting state patronage. There are better lithographers here than I am, but I'll try. Eloy Seidenfeld in the 1790s found that oil and water were different, particularly when it came to writing. If you wrote on a fine-grained polished limestone with oil, you could print from that and the water would keep everything else so you could get good lines. So you could draw either with a crayon, which is on the left, or like a stylus cut through a gum arabic layer on the stone, which would give you very precise marks. Engraving, they called it. And of course, both of those are Grafton's work. Lithography, again, up at the top left, if you're stoned, the Levi Strauss Archives owns that one. That one's probably from about 1906, and of course it's their brand. On the lower left, the stones were so polished, if you touched them with a finger, you left your oil, and you had a ruined stone. So they would transfer the images by putting their wrists, elbows, lower arms on a board, and then draw, which is what he's doing. Then there's the press, running the stone through. By 70, Richard Hoe had a steam lithographic press. Britton and Ray was the first in the city to get one. Brown got his in 71. Had a steam plant put in his building. His office was on Printers Row, which in this time, the 60s, 70s, 50s, 60s, 70s, was Sacramento and Clay Streets from, let's see, I think about Battery to Montgomery was where the printers were. This is Sansom Street in the foreground on Clay Street. There are at least 12 printers, assorted newspapers and everything else, and Brown was on Clay Street. The ad is the building, the 540 Clay, which is the second building from Montgomery. So this is where Grafton hung out. The Mechanics Institute was a great support of the arts and the printers. It would essentially dole out its printing for the annual fairs to spread it among the printers so they'd all get a piece. In 1868, they had a committee, including Britton of Britton and Ray, which was the largest firm and the firm that Brown would take on with his designs, essentially said that, you know, well, they have good machinery here in San Francisco for lithography, but they sure ain't doing much good with it. It really needs improvement. That improvement came in the 1870s. And one thing I do in this talk is show Brown against Britton and Ray and some others. Top left, yellow, that's Grafton Brown's ticket for the Mechanics Fair. The bottom one is Britton and Ray. Two different styles, and you can decide which one you like best. Of course, you always have show-offs. Here I compare Edward Bosque, who's considered the father of fine printing in San Francisco, and GTB. Bosque decided when he entered printing in the late 1860s, he would take on the largest printing firm, Town and Bacon. And he printed some very nice books. That's the poems of James Lennon over there to the left, and he did William Warren Stoddard. Both are considered two very fine press books. And then in 1878, when Edward Bosque decided to go into lithography, he went into chromolithography and did The Grapevines of California, which is a magnificent set. John Windle, of course, is a great authority on that one. In fact, he reprinted it. Brown, for himself in 1860-65, he did perhaps the first chromolithograph in San Francisco as the cover for a little guide. And you can also see how elaborate his billhead is, because he specialized in lettering. So how do you grab attention? You do it this way. Because after all, if a business wanted to advertise, there wasn't much you could do. The papers had thin columns, and were kept that way because of the types of presses they used. They couldn't really expand, and there was very little other ways to meet people, either a small newspaper ad or in the invoices or billheads they sent you. So a lot of the merchants went into billheads. So here's starting design, the letterpress printers. On the left is our friend in minimalism, Edward Bosque. This is kabuki. You just see the black figure getting the props. What I'm trying to show in these slides is just the general ideas of design and such, what was there, and then what G.T. Brown is going to do. As far as on the right for general printing, one company which mastered essentially all of the current styles of letterpress was the Women's Cooperative Printing Union under Lizzie Richmond. And they signed all of their work. And you can see they're quite good. The billhead at the top, which of course unfortunately she printed in purple, actually she used other colors, but I only have a purple one, is hard to read, but she declares, women set type. Women run presses. Call and examine specimens. We invite criticism. So you see they did very nice work, and as I say, signed everything. So we did this. Lithography, on to Britton and Ray. You can see their billhead. Young Ray, Valentine Ray, worked for Guittard Chocolate, which is still around, and he then became part of Palmer and Ray Type Founders. But you can see what Britton and Ray is doing. One, they had the market for overall advertising envelopes. I've enhanced the colors here so you can see it. But it's Guittard Chocolate. And one thing you could do with lithography, which is the one under the pink, is the top of the other billhead. See the design where they've got the top of the building and the smokestacks? You can blow this up. But it's just, very tiny, but they're doing this on stone lithography. And then, of course, they did a very handsome billhead for Wakely Druggists. As I say, this was the largest and best known lithography firm in the city, and Brown was going to take them on. Brown had a staff of 4 at first and then up to 8 at the end of the 70s. Britton and Ray began in 52. It was Englishman Joseph Britton who did the art, Frenchman Jacques Joseph Ray who did portraits, and Henry Steininger who did lettering. Bancroft. This was Alfred Little Bancroft, who was essentially the printing arm of his brother Hubert Howe Bancroft's history factory. And I haven't been too impressed with Bancroft lithography. It seems to be sort of, flowery and unfocused and a few things like that. But as you can also see, I blew up the top of the building there on the right so you can see what the detail you can get. Typesetters are essentially right angles. You could do some bending, but it was really contorted till the 1880s when they got into artistic, which we won't. But lithography could do all sorts of swirls and squiggles and everything else, and they did. And of course, there's a little battle here. You can see the California Cracker Company. On the left, the yellow one, that's by Grafton Tyler Brown. And he showed the Broadway side of the building, the short side. And there's the flags there, but there's nothing much going on. Bancroft took the Battery Street side of the building, the longer side, and emphasized it with the steam and such coming out. And Bancroft got a very much more livelier scene than Brown did. Max Schmidt, who became the largest lithographer in the city, and the firm lasted into the 1990s. In fact, as you're going from west to east over the Emperor Norton Bridge, and you see the clock tower, the pointed clock tower, which is apartments or condos, that's the old Schmidt factory. And you can see the circle with the S in it. In fact, it was one thing about Grafton Brown and his ancestry. Scholars have always known him as African American because when Harry Peters did California on Stone in 1935, he read this 1922 memoir by Max Schmidt, who says, in 1874, I worked for that, quote, colored man, Brown. So he never passed as far as scholars were concerned. And it was Schmidt who, as I say, became the dominant. And you can see early in the 70s here, he's developing a good style. So now we get to Grafton. You can see what he's doing with his lettering. It's much bolder. There are more swirls. It was the Levi Strauss one that got me into this whole thing because I bought one of those and says, this looks neat. I wonder who did it and why. But you can see how he's making his billhead stand out using the shading, blacks, and everything else. Important companies went to Brown in the mid-1870s. They included the California Cracker Company, which is Nabisco, Cutting and Company, Canners, which is Del Monte, the Fireman's Fund Insurance Company, Folger Coffee, Ghirardelli Chocolate, the Pioneer Woolen Mills, which you saw, and druggist Reddington and Company, which is a 49 Pioneer and was an exceedingly huge pharmaceutical firm. It still exists after many mergers. And finally, the blue jeans icon Levi Strauss and Company. So comparison, it's Francis Valentine on the top and Grafton on the bottom. The way this lecture is structured, you cheer for Grafton. William Harrison, who I always like his job printing, but he did the one on the top. But you can really see Grafton's on the bottom. It's the type thing, if you spread out a pile of billheads, from everybody, say we'll keep it to the 1870s, you can easily pick out Ed Bosque's because they're the thinnest and less type, and you can pick out Grafton's because of his dominance of the lettering. Here's the coffee. Top one, top left, Max Schmidt, sort of Middle one, Grafton Brown. It's good. Bottom left, Schmidt looked at both the predecessor one and says, I've got it. So Schmidt won this battle. But this was only about 3 years. It seems every time a company wanted a new billhead, they just ordered a new billhead, a new design. Because, of course, the printers couldn't keep the typeset up. So I think I had Isidore N. Chinoisky. I think I have some billheads of his where he changed them about every 3 months. There was no consistency. It wasn't until the 80s and 90s you started having a consistent look and the use of trademarks and things like that. To finish up this, and you're cheering now because I'm finally getting through the damn billheads. Now, the only thing lower than billheads are receipts. So these are receipts. And I'm sure you can figure out who done what to whom. Left side, top two, Women's Cooperative Printing Union. Very nicely done. Lower left, Bosque. Two top on the right, Grafton. See where he's had lots of fun with the names. And the bottom one, right, is Bancroft. Interestingly, Bancroft printed its billheads and lithographed its receipts. You thought you were through. You're just getting into stocks now. Here we are in the section. The top two running across are George H. Baker of Sacramento, San Francisco, a Gold Rush wood engraver, then lithographer. No sense of design. On the left, bottom, yellow, that's a Bancroft. Another And on the right, equally is Ed Bosque. So if you really wanted good stock certificates, you went to two companies, Grafton Brown and Britton and Ray. Grafton did 80 that I found. Britton and Ray probably did double that. Because the 1870s was when you had the Comstock frenzy. Everyone was investing in mines. Britton and Ray, you can see the quality exuded here. I particularly like the leopard, and you can see where Steineger is having fun with the M for the mining and milling, and then they also like to take the initial letter of the stock and then do a vignette related to the stock. But here's Grafton, a Bodie mine, the Summit. The whole sheet with details on the stock itself under the S. The only decent 6-horse Concord coach I've found. Of course, it has a name I know. Of course, the mine had nothing to do with the Bank and Express Company. In fact, the mine had nothing to do with any ore and never found anything. So why did it exist? Well, when you bought stock back then, you either got dividends if it paid, or you got assessments, which meant you had to pay it to explore or do whatever. The Wells Fargo mine lived off of assessments for about 5 or 6 years. More Grafton, you can see the ecological devastation called hydraulic mining, which finally got too much even for the U.S. courts that they put a ban on it in 1884. You had to impound your tailings after Marysville and other cities were flooding. Top, People's Ice Company, you can see the trains leaving the ice ponds up in Nevada County But you can also see where Brown has put icicles for his border. He's picking up the theme because, hey, the prettier the stock certificate, the more you can sell, even if there's no bullion. One of Brown's own designs was the miner up there on the right of the lander. When they got rid of revenue stamps, he switched it over to the left side on the silver cord and added a third one, and then everyone else picked it up. The Fresno one is from Britton and Ray. The Jay Gould is a stray one out of Montana. The Hale and Norcross is a 1900 one from Nevada. So essentially, Brown did that drawing, and stock certificate printers all over picked it up. Then he also did little advertising notes. Of course, I found out about the sale of these about 2 years after it was over, so I have to use photocopies. But I did use his sample book there to put in what the little designs, the main vignettes that Brown drew. Just to give you an example of his versatility. Of course, the 1861 Virginia City bird's eye view, the first of Virginia City, Nevada. Thank you, Honeymoon Collection. And the 1864, also by Brown. Thank you again, Honeymoon Collection. So these are what he's really known for, these huge city views. But I have more fun with things like this. Sheet music, Matthias Gray. The one on the left, it's a very maudlin song about two girls taking flowers to their mother's grave in the dead of winter. One on the left is by Britton and Ray. The one on the right is by Grafton Brown. So you can see how Grafton has made the design his own. He's enlarged it, and particularly where the title for Britton and Ray, the snow is just sitting there. For Brown, the wind that's hitting the back of the umbrella is also stirring the snow on the title. Of course, membership certificates, that's a Welsh one on the left. And news events, this is the blowing up of Blossom Rock by von Schmidt. They took it down to about 50 feet below water. They're now thinking of, it's still a hazard, and they're now thinking of even blowing more off the top. But Brown captured the moment of explosion. Some color lithography. In 1860, there was a San Francisco tinsmith, African-American, named John Dees. Well, what's John Dees going to do? What do you do as a tinsmith? Well, not much. Went up to Victoria, British Columbia. By 73, he was the largest canner of salmon. And Brown did one of his labels. This label's from 76. A favorite of the California State Library, you can stand on your soapbox. This, of course, was the inner lid, because in a general store you flipped up the lid so people could see the color, and then the product was right below it in the bottom part of the box. But you can see he's had great fun with these very large posters. California Historical owns the one on the left if you want to see the original one. Library of Congress has the other one. Maps are what really brought in his money. And you can see how much fun he had with the lettering for that Tideland map. This is what Ben Washington and the Tideland commissioners were paying him to do. And it's about so big by so. And then, of course, Highland Park. It's where Highland Hospital is in Oakland today. Sessions was one of his good friends. And what I like about this copy is you can see how they started subdividing it later on. But he's doing very readable maps. Here he's had fun. Notice Table Mountain, how he shaped it, and has the Devil's Gate and the toll road and some of the other buildings. Well, it also has the Wells Fargo office too, so. 1878, the county history of San Mateo County. There were about 80 drawings in it, of which Brown did half and Britton and Ray did the other half. This was the home of the head of the Spring Valley Waterworks in the city. And then, of course, Nevada, another mug book, the Thompson and West History of Nevada County, or Nevada State. I've got one over here. Brown did 5 of the drawings, and these are the first drawings where he really signed them. The San Mateo, it just said, Litho, underneath it, it said Litho G.T. Brown and Company. This, in the print, it says G.T. Brown, D.E.L., Delevet, meaning I drew this. So he's transforming out as a lithographer and into an artist. He sold G.T. Brown and Company to his partner, William Galloway, in the fall of 1878. And then he stayed around California. I think he was waiting for him to pay him off. Then he joined a survey going up to British Columbia. So Brown, in the 80s, has decided he's becoming an artist. The one on the left is Mount Shasta, looking at it, looking north to south. And the other one is before the survey. I was happy to find it dated July of 82. I put the Oakland Museum in the cellar into contact, so the museum has it now. But this is, of course, Lake Tahoe. What Brown did after he left San Francisco was essentially follow the Northern Pacific Railroad. 82, he was in Victoria, British Columbia, then Tacoma, Washington, Portland, Oregon, Helena, Montana, which was the headquarters for Yellowstone, which was his favorite. And then he finished up working for the Army Corps of Engineers and then the city of St. Paul in their public works program as a draftsman. The British Columbia paintings, Brown, being Brown, had photographs taken of 20 of them. And on the bottom are somewhat poor, but those are what the paintings really look like. But of course, with Brown's photographs, you want one, you could send them out and say, you want one of these? Sure. I mean, I know of at least 2 copies of the one on the right. Mount Tacoma. Oh, wait, Mount Rainier. Seattle won that naming thing. In 1886, Brown moved to Portland, Oregon, where he became the secretary of the Portland Art Club, which was the first art club in Portland. And as secretary, he did all the work. He essentially ran everything. His best friend was Ed Espy, the treasurer. But also, Brown, who became an artist, let's say in 1882, by 86 was teaching art. He was now Professor Brown, because everyone said, you really learn from nature. It's not from books or from studios or anything else. So here's Grafton. And his real love became Yellowstone, where he was there from 86 to 91 when he gave up his painting and went to work for the Corps of Engineers. But for Yellowstone also, he had two lithograph sheets with maybe 12 illustrations or so on each, and they were all numbered. So he'd mail these out, very light paper, so you could order one of number 2, 3 of number 4, and so forth and so on, and Brown would do it. His brush strokes in British Columbia were very tight and close because he was taking time on the paintings. Once he's getting into Yellowstone, I think the Impressionists are getting to him and he's using much broader strokes. And here we have his letterhead with a nice Geyser of Old Faithful. Lithographed, of course. And finally, from the 1890s, we have a faded picture of Grafton and one he took of his home, because now these photographs on the back of them have G.T. Brown, photographer. But you can see Brown, his photographs, and the family dog. His wife, Albertine, isn't in there. She was the widow of Ed Espy, his other painting partner. So here we have Brown. He died in 1918, and he'd essentially accomplished what he wanted to in life. He became an artist from 1860, well, till his death, because he kept doing arty things up till then. His main work, of course, was from 1860 to, say, 1891. But, you know, who would have thought that a poor kid from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, would end up making something of himself? Because he had this dedication. He obviously got along well with people. He can negotiate, and he did it. So thank you.